Can progressives gain real power this election cycle? Welcome to Future Hindsight, where we take big ideas in civic life and democracy and turn them into action items for you and me. Because democracy is not a spectator sport, and tomorrow starts right now. I'm Mila Atmos. As primary season gets underway, the early results are revealing a snapshot of what American voters actually care about right now. Turnout numbers, grassroots donations, and the issues drawing people to the ballot box all point to a public increasingly focused on accountability, economic fairness, and the health of democratic institutions themselves. To assess the gap between what people want from government and what's being offered by politicians, we're joined by Adam Green. He's the co-founder of the Progressive Change Campaign Committee, or PCCC, a million-member organization that has raised over $40 million for progressive candidates nationwide. Adam is a veteran political strategist and previously led campaigns at MoveOn.org and the DNC. And before we start, if you want to support Future Hindsight and all the work we do as an independent podcast, please leave us a review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you're listening. It's easy and free, and it really goes a long way. Thank you. Welcome, Adam. Thank you for joining us.
Great to be here.
So your work is all about electing bold progressives at the federal, state, and local level. And I think people understand progressive, the word progressive, differently in different circles. So let's just make sure we're all talking about the same thing here. How do you define progressive?
I love that first question. Broadly, I would define progressive as someone who challenges power on behalf of everyday people. That can extend to challenging Wall Street power, to challenging systemic racism. Our organization is primarily an economic populist organization, fighting billionaire power, corporate abuse of workers, abuse of consumers in the marketplace, trying to unrig both our political system and our economic system on behalf of everyday people. And then we also show up for the fight as various ally groups, lead the way on those other issues. And then we do half elections and half government relations work. So we are very much an election group, but also an issue advocacy group. In fact, with our own lobbying arm called P Street, the People's Alternative to K Street, which engages our friends in Congress often.
Oh, excellent. So this sounds almost repetitive, but just to be clear, why do you feel we need progressive candidates in office? And who is a quintessential progressive politician that we all know? Like, who's a person that you'd like to point to, and why is that person progressive? And why do we need this kind of person in office?
Sure. If we were playing Family Feud, I think Bernie Sanders, AOC, Elizabeth Warren would make the big board. We work very closely with Jamie Raskin, who is very much a pro-democracy progressive, and I'm sure you followed his work deeply. But one thing we've been really trying to do is challenge ourselves to find bold economic populists in the swing states and swing districts, and really kind of prove for America, particularly in this 2026 election cycle, that bold, inspiring economic populists, shake up the system outsiders can win not just in blue cities and blue states, but in purple and red states as well. And that's why we were very involved with the James Tallarico primary in Texas for Senate. We're very involved in the Graham Plattner primary in Maine for Senate, and Abdul El Sayed running for Senate in Michigan. 3 critical swing or flippable Senate seats where we can prove the concept that bold, inspiring economic populism wins everywhere.
Right. Let's talk about that, because we are speaking on the heels of the Tallarico win in the primary. And notably on the Republican side, there will be a runoff between Cornyn and Paxton. So tell us a little bit about the campaign that you helped run for Tallarico, how it's different than other Democrats, let's say, on the ground in Texas. And what do you think about his odds, given that there will be a runoff on the Republican side, which I'm sure will cost a lot of money and distract from each person's race on the Republican side?
Yeah. Well, to start with the last part first, his odds are better than Democrats have been probably since the 1990s when we last won an election in Texas. And part of the reason is he's a fantastic candidate who is seen as squarely on the side of working people willing to challenge powerful interests. The other is that, as you said, Republicans now have a runoff in May and will be spending tens of millions, if not hundreds of millions of dollars against each other, which means they're both kind of blowing each other up and also not attacking him as much as they would if it was a contest right now. So, Democrats are great pulling defeat from the jaws of victory. We've done it many times before, but we certainly are set up for success here. The reason that we got involved in this race is, we take the time to interview candidates. And going into our candidate interview with him, actually the first week of this year, I wasn't sure what to expect. I knew that he was known as kind of quoting the Bible and had caught some grassroots momentum. But I was ridiculously impressed by the cogency of his answers and the cogency of his worldview between answers. No matter what we asked about, he had a narrative about challenging power, challenging billionaire and corporate power on behalf of working people, the need for structural change. That's not the kind of thing we hear from enough candidates, frankly. And when you say, why do we need progressives? Gosh, in this environment when so many things are broken, don't we need to challenge some power? In this environment where, I'll just say, folks like Chuck Schumer are not our A team. Like, we need people who are willing to shake up the system and challenge the establishment. And anybody who's just kind of starting off at the point that they should be most in touch with the people, which is launching their campaign before they ever get to Congress and the corridors of power. If people at that point are giving milquetoast answers and don't really have a worldview that includes challenging power, that's a problem. We were very excited by his campaign. And then you mentioned the progressive label earlier in your first question. And, I think some people saw Jasmine Crockett as the progressive in this race. I know her personally, and as someone who works very closely with a lot of members of Congress. She, I think, is a very effective jouster of Team Red versus Team Blue in committee hearings. In an attention economy, we need more people who can get attention. She's very good at that. But on economic fights of the day, which we're very involved in against big pharma, big banks, crypto, whatever, she just doesn't participate in those. And some people on Capitol Hill do and some people don't. That's just not her thing. So I also don't think that was Kamala Harris's thing. So especially in this economic populist moment that we're in, we just thought, okay, well, there's a clear, bold economic populist willing to challenge corporate and billionaire power in this race. We're going to get behind them. And I'm very glad we did with Talarico.
Tell us a little bit about the bold piece and being an outsider in some sense. You talked about outsider energy just now. And I want to tie this into the 2024 election defeat in the presidential and what you're seeing now, 2 years later. Like, what are the lessons learned there? And specifically, how does Talarico campaign differently than the presidential campaign did in 2024?
Yeah. So I'll start off with a little story. A lot of my 2023 and 2024 was spent at the White House showing polling to Biden administration officials on economic issues. And our general starting point was Democrats are not winning with the public on the economy. Why is that? Maybe it's because we're talking about too many things and nothing's actually breaking through. So we pulled a bunch of stuff we already knew that we agreed with. Everything from reducing student debt to taxing billionaires to pharma policy to everything else. And some were backward-looking accomplishments, some were forward-looking promises. And we just lined them up for them and showed this is how they are, apples to apples, popularity-wise. And we had a second question to the public, how much have you heard about this issue? And on almost every popular issue, only like 20% of the public had heard about it. And so we call this slide in our deck, popularity versus volume. And we're like, things are popular, but no one's hearing about it. So if you need permission, we're giving you permission. Just pick the top 3 and go for it with those. Don't talk about everything. Otherwise, nothing breaks through. And we were having some success. And Joe Biden actually used some of our language that we were recommending verbatim in his final State of the Union, where we were marrying together the issues of Social Security and taxing billionaires. It was basically Democrats want to protect or expand Social Security and by asking billionaires to pay their fair share. Republicans want to cut taxes for billionaires while cutting Social Security and other programs like Medicare. And he used that verbatim, and we were thrilled. And then he started using that language around the country as he gave speeches. And we're like, okay, this is actually a thing. And then there was the transfer to Harris, and we had done some updated polling. And one of the top issues was corporate price gouging as a reason for prices going up. And our point to them was, somebody will be left holding the bag. It's either the people in charge, which is you, or these corporations, which are jacking up prices for consumers. You can't not name a villain here. And then we tested like 20 different versions of corporate price gouging. And by far, stratospheric, through the roof, was corporate price gouging of groceries. People were feeling it, about 2 to 1 over gas prices and utilities and housing. So we're like, here's your lane, hit this out of the ballpark. And they gave one speech doing that. And then they got all this corporate donor pushback. And it was erased from her Democratic convention speech. If you go back and listen to it, there was not one thing challenging billionaires or corporations. Not even a fig leaf, not even a small bore thing, nothing. Eventually, it made its way back into her 20-minute speech, one line in her speech on corporate price gouging, one line on Social Security, one line on billionaires. But it never made news because she wasn't doing anything on it. She wasn't standing in front of a corporate price gougers headquarters and saying, these people are ripping you off at the grocery store. I'm going to do something about it. She wasn't down the street from Wall Street being like, I'm going to ask billionaires to pay their fair share to protect your Social Security. And meanwhile, Donald Trump is there at McDonald's, right? And when the debate happened, her debate, not Biden's debate, our entire team was standing by, ready to pull video clips and post her, hitting him on corporate price gouging or billionaire stuff. Not one punch was thrown on economics. Beautiful answers on abortion, fine answers on democracy, no punches thrown on economic populism issues. And what that said to me was, she doesn't really mean it. It's not in her gut. She's willing to say yes when it's put on paper in front of her and say, oh, sure, I agree with that, put it in my speech. But she wasn't willing to make the case and be full-throated about it the way, say, a Bernie would be, right? And during the final couple of weeks of the election, myself and a colleague spent some time on the ground with Dan Osborne, the independent mechanic union leader running in a 20-point red state in Nebraska, who ended up outperforming Kamala by 14 points, better than any Democrat running for Senate in the nation, John Tester, Sherrod Brown, anybody.
Yeah, that was amazing, that stat.
Yeah, it was amazing. And, every question asked of him by a reporter or a voter, he instinctively made it about workers and corporate power. If it was about the environment, immigration, or economics, that was his narrative, not because he was media trained, because that's who he was. So long story short, the big takeaway I had from the 2024 election was it's actually not sufficient to be, quote unquote, on message. We need people who are from the gut, economic populists, people who exude outsider vibes, who acknowledge that we have a broken system, which Hillary didn't do, Kamala didn't do, Trump sadly did do, Dan Osborne did, James Tallarico does. I think Elizabeth Warren does. That's the kind of candidate we need. And therefore, our bar is higher this election cycle for the candidates we endorse. We want someone who can defend the position, drips and oozes authenticity when they're talking about the economic populist position. I think that's the kind of person we need going forward.
Yeah, drips and oozes authenticity. Tell us a little bit more about that, because I think that's a difficult one. It's the kind of thing you were just saying about Kamala Harris not really meaning it. And I had a conversation with Maurice Mitchell of the Working Families Party, and he said that he was knocking on a door in Pennsylvania, and he was talking about the $25,000 aid that the U.S. government would be providing if you're a first-time homeowner. And apparently the retort at the door was, she's really going to do that? Nobody believed it, right? Even though she even said something in this direction, it was not believed. So are you saying that we must have only working class candidates?
I'm not saying we must have only working class candidates. We need people who connect to the working class, workers, families, and who are believed, right? A behind the scenes thought would be if somebody is looking at a poll, realizing something is popular and saying it for the first time, that's probably not really in their gut, and they're not going to be very effective at making the case for that thing. Whereas if people use polling to test how to phrase stuff they've been talking about their whole life, working on their whole life, right? A nurse running for office, a teacher running for office. Oh, there's a million ways to talk about education, 10 different things that I believe. Let me just make sure the way I'm talking connects with voters. That's a good use of a poll. Oh, there's this thing called education and college affordability. Oh, I should say that? Okay, college affordability. Right? No one's going to believe you. And it's tough because there's so many people who just think of themselves running for office their entire life and are so poll-driven and scared that they're willing to just take consultant advice and not follow their gut. So that's why we're putting a big premium on that. The outsider thing I just want to go a little deeper on. I don't really use the word left and right personally because I think it implies that positions that are progressive are on like the end of a bell curve and in a fringe position when normally they're 80-20 issues. So generally I shy away from that. But for purposes
What's an 80-20 issue?
Well, taxing billionaires is probably a 90-10 issue.
Okay. I just want to make sure that people know what you're talking about.
Yeah. Protecting Social Security is generally an 85% popular issue. Expanding Social Security is usually 75 to 80%. And it's like, that's the kind of polling that we do just to figure out, like, we don't want 51-49 issues even. We want supermajority issues. Let's start with that first. So outsiders. I would encourage people to think about not just a left-right values question when we think about politics, but a second axis that goes up and down about insider versus outsider. And I was on a panel in the UK several months ago, and I heard all these people who were affiliated with the labor side of things there talking about the Nigel Farage Reform Party. Reform wants to do this, and Reform wants to do that. And at one point, when it was my turn to speak, I was like, I'm here from America. I have a fresh ear when hearing this. I'm just going to be a canary in a coal mine. Stop calling them Reform, because most people hear Reform, and that sounds great. And they think of a crusty, barnacled Labor Party on the left and a crusty, barnacled conservative party on the right, and there's a nice, fresh outsider reform party. Drag them into the mud, call them the far right reform party, or what do they want to reform towards? And I don't just give them reform, right? Mm-hmm. The nationalist reform, whatever. And this person comes up to me afterwards and she goes, I'm a linguist. You're totally right. We got to stop saying reform. I was like, are you a good linguist? How did you not realize that? But once you start seeing the political world through the glasses of insider-outsider, everything looks different. And to give us one example there, when the very tentative truce in the Middle East was crafted a few months ago, Israel, Palestine, J.D. Vance said the reason we were able to achieve this is we got rid of all the old negotiators, the people who had failed for years. And we put in our own guys, people who had never done it before. And they cut a deal and they got it success. And that might feel like bravado or just like a silly side statement. But I heard it and I was like, oh, wow, he is tapping into out with the old, in with the new, right? And for that same reason, if Democrats are talking about the exact same issues they've talked about for 20 years, 30 years, right? We want to raise the minimum wage. We're going to be pro-choice. All that is true. All that is popular on paper. But it gets the exact thing you said Maurice saw on the door in Pennsylvania, which is, you're going to do that? Because you've promised that for like the last 10 election cycles. Why would I believe that? And that's why I think someone like Zohran Mamdani, when he talked about fresh ideas, free busing, that wasn't anybody's polling, right? Like things like that made him sound authentic and outsider because he wasn't just repeating the same stale talking points that Chuck Schumer's been talking about in New York for 30 years. So I'll leave it there.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And as a woman, as a mother, what I really heard was universal childcare. Yeah. And I personally feel like this will change so much for so many people if he can really pull it off. And so I'm rooting for him on this specifically. We'll be back with Adam in just a moment, so stick around. You have to hear this episode's Civic Spark. One small step we can all take to be more empowered and ignite collective change. But first, starting something new is more than just hard. It can be terrifying. So much work goes into this thing that you're not entirely sure will even work out. And it can be tough to make that leap of faith. Trust me, I know. When I started Future Hindsight, I didn't totally know what I was doing. And those questions swirled around. What if no one listens? What if I make a fool of myself? I knew I had a mission, but those thoughts linger whether you want them or not. But now, I know that I was right in believing in myself, despite any fears or hesitations. Of course, it can also help when you have a partner like Shopify on your side. Shopify is the commerce platform behind millions of businesses around the world and 10% of all e-commerce in the US. From household names like Alo Yoga to fresh brands that are just getting started. And Shopify is there for you, too. Accelerate your efficiency, whether you're uploading new products or trying to improve existing ones. Shopify is packed with helpful AI tools that write product descriptions, page headlines, and even enhance your product photography. Now, you might be wondering, what if people haven't heard about my brand? It's okay. Shopify helps you find your customers with easy-to-run email and social media campaigns. So, tackle all those important tasks in one place, from inventory to payments to analytics and more. No need to save multiple websites or try to figure out what platform is hosting the tool that you need. Everything is all in one spot, making your life easier and your business operations smoother. What I love about Shopify is how no matter how big you want to grow, Shopify gives you everything you need to take control and take your business to the next level. It's time to turn those what-ifs into cha-ching with Shopify today. Sign up for your $1 per month trial today at shopify.com/hopeful. Go to shopify.com/hopeful. That's shopify.com/hopeful. And now, let's return to my conversation with Adam Green. I have a question about you founding PCCC. You founded it in 2009. What was the gap that you were trying to bridge? Because, of course, there are other organizations that also help elect candidates and do polling and help them with the ground game, et cetera, et cetera. Tell us more.
So you mentioned I previously worked at moveon.org. My PCCC co-founder, Stephanie Taylor, also was there in 2008. And a few of us were on a nature trail hike during a MoveOn retreat. and lamenting about how many good progressives run for office, mostly Congress, we were talking about, and they are left to fend for themselves. And MoveOn's model, to its great credit, is very member-oriented. They take surveys of their members. If 2/3 of their local members don't support a candidate, they don't endorse in a primary, even when everybody knows who the clear progressive or bold progressive is, right? So in the Elizabeth Warren primary, there were 7 candidates running. There were a lot of local loyalties, even people who were proudly progressive nationally, loved this or that state senator or mayor, and there wasn't consensus, right? Whereas we ran the draft Elizabeth Warren campaign, and we're the first group to endorse her then and for president later. So we just decided, there's a DCCC to help Democrats. Maybe there should be a PCCC to help progressives. We kind of started with an acronym. It was like, okay, well, what could this stand for? Well, we support progressive change, and we'd be a campaign committee, so that makes sense. We then tried to get pccc.com. It was a very expensive website owned by some Christian camp or something. So we got boldprogressives.org for $13 or $17. And from there, we had a brand, right? And, you say there's a lot of entities that help progressives. Really, at that point, there wasn't. And there are a number of entities that do a lot of outside work for progressives, doing independent expenditure TV ads, stuff like that. But our campaign team goes on the ground, helps design a field program, helps them think through their finance program, helps them think about grassroots engagement, or even having their finger on the pulse of national stuff so that they can weigh in at opportune moments. And some of the boldest ones don't need that help, right? When Trump bombed Iran, Graham Plattner, Abdul al-Sayed, and others were out there immediately with statements. When ICE was invading communities, a lot of bold candidates immediately were calling for them to be accountable. Others were thinking, oh, let me poll it. Let me see if I should say reform or abolish or dismantle or what. Let's see what the polling says. A lot of bold ones are like, I know what I believe. I'm going to make the case. So here you have Graham Plattner, who went so far as to say abolish ICE in a very swing seat in Maine and has gotten rewarded for it. Our polling and other polling shows he's up by large double digits over the current governor, Janet Mills, who generally plays it safe. So that was how it started. And then I had one of the most meaningful years of my life in South Dakota, where we won in a very Republican year by 527 votes because we were able to attract culturally conservative, evangelical, gun-owning farmers and ranchers to vote for a Democrat because we were campaigning against big corporations who wanted to gobble up their family farms. And my co-founder, Stephanie, organized nursing home workers in Appalachia, West Virginia, Kentucky, Ohio. These are nurses who were out on the picket line by day and going to George W. Bush rallies by night. And she was like, oh, they are so economic populist, yet they don't see Democrats representing that strain. So economic populism has really been baked into our DNA since we got off the ground. And that's why we prioritize it so much, not just as values, but as a theory of winning for Democrats in purple and red areas, in addition to blue.
Theory of winning. Let's talk about that because we are, after all, in the United States, which is a very expensive place to run for office. Tiffany Muller, who we just had on a few weeks ago, she told us that the Senate races this year, 2026, are slated to cost about $2.4 billion. So when you're thinking about a grassroots campaign, you're not taking PAC money and you're running for the people, which I totally respect and support. How do you think about, building an infrastructure that can actually still roll out the big bucks? Because I think you kind of need to. I mean, I don't know how you can do it without, or maybe you can, but tell me more. Yeah.
Well, first, congratulations on having Tiffany Muller and having Maurice Mitchell, Julia Spiegel. You've had some great guests on the show. I'm honored to be in their presence, in your presence. That is one of the fundamental issues of our time, the disparity in campaign spending, and really one of the lessons I think crypto learned in the last election cycle is that there is infinite ROI, return on investment, for them to invest in politics, right? I mean, look at Elon Musk as another example. Like, he invested $250 million in Trump, and immediately after the election, his net worth went up to, I believe, $200 billion, just his stock prices, right, when Trump. And it's like, wow, if you can invest $200 million and get back $200 billion, why not spend $300 million? Why not spend $1 billion, right? This cycle, artificial intelligence companies are attempting to get into the game, right? So this is actually different from big money of prior years where there was more of a discrete budget, where they coupled together a few million here, a few million there, and then still tried to outmaneuver progressives or Democrats. This is just wow, the complete merger of corporate money and politics. And just to be clear, their end goal is to then rig the rules so that it works better for them and wealth is concentrated at the top and less goes to workers. Again, it's not just their personal stock prices. It is, they can get trillions and trillions of dollars in deals, tax cuts, rules that crowd out innovators and small businesses from ever competing with them just by ensconcing their power. That is their end game, right? So just to start off with a really depressing note, to get to how do we ever compete? So first, there is a genre of candidates that can kind of capture lightning in a bottle and fundraise from the grassroots. I'm not sure that scales to every Democratic candidate. I think it's impossible. But if you think of AOC, for example, who I think raised the most money of any House member this past year, that's testament to her boldness and the public rewarding boldness at a time when that is needed. Now, again, the irony of that is if everybody is bold, nobody's bold, right? Like the trick there is to stand ahead of the pack. Graham Plattner in Maine, it just keeps going viral and keeps going viral because he's speaking truths, saying things in ways that Democrats never say about structural power and how his campaign is a vessel for challenging that power. And I have confidence that some of the boldest candidates will actually get rewarded and have sufficient money to compete. But systemically, we have to think bigger than that, right? And I think we have to get creative, and that's honestly where infrastructure comes in. And I talked to some donors who are like, I only give to candidates. I'm like, honestly, if you're only giving to candidates, that's a dollar in, dollar out proposition. How about a dollar in, $20 out proposition by investing in infrastructure? That's what infrastructure is politically. And we need more of it if we're going to compete against big money because we can't go dollar for dollar, right? Actually about to convene a meeting of some people in the creative community, filmmakers, documentarians, people like that, to pose the question, like, is there some way of applying skills of the creative class to our campaigns in a way of doing things better than typical consultants who might make TV ads, but also taking these people who actually would probably volunteer for free, people who make major Oscar-nominated documentary type stuff, who, yes, they can give money, yes, they can make phone calls in the final couple weeks, but would love year-round to give their talents to saving their democracy. Can we organize them? I don't know. It's an open question. I do think that we just need to figure out kind of economies of scale, investing in infrastructure, taking latent capacity off the sideline like the creative class. Honestly, just to have networks in the community. It's like, oh, you're talking about healthcare? Give me a week. I'm going to find former Republicans who are being hurt by Trump's jacking up of healthcare costs. I'm going to find a first-time voter who's young, who's scared about going into the world if they graduate college. I will find the people to help put stories on your policies and really flesh out. There's probably people all across the country who could do that. To me, that's latent capacity. That's infrastructure. It's not money as much as tapping into networks and having the understanding and prowess to do that right.
Well, I think you're really asking a question about the culture wars in some sense. And I have to say that one of the things when I was growing up, I felt like the Alex P. Keaton character was so effective in making somebody who is conservative and not being understood by his own family really, endearing and cute and adorable. And we kind of felt like, oh, he's okay. I feel like progressives need a character like that who is a popular figure and whose politics we understand and why. And, what Alex P. Keaton did on TV was constantly talk about the politics and the policies and why they mattered to him. So that leads me to my next question about the Peace Street work. Tell us a little bit more about the policies that you're advocating for on the Hill, because I think this is not seen.
Yes, it is not seen. We could probably do a better job of making it visible, but also it's intentionally behind the scene. Almost, that's kind of what it does. So the policies, our general ethos is find things to organize members of Congress on that are both bold economic populist policies and where there would be compelling storytelling with the public, when it goes public. Often there's months of work just to kind of get ducks in a row before there's ever a bill introduced or a strategy launched publicly. But we want it to be compelling when we do. That is an alternative to really hyper-technical edits to this bill or that bill. That's not what we do. We're basically campaigners. We are organizing. And what we add is in a Capitol Hill world of busy lives where people have negative time, every time I do a Capitol Hill meeting, I'm always reminded people have no time to think, right? If we bring in a poll and it's like, let's think together for 25 minutes, they're like, oh, wow, I haven't done this in months, right? Just thinking about, and it's like, okay, so how are you ever going to have really strategic work when people don't have time to communicate with each other on the Hill or think about how do I actually connect effectively with the public broadly, nationally? So one issue that our team has been working on for a few years now is this issue that is now coming to prominence increasingly, which is banning congressional insider stock trading. This was nowhere 4 years ago. And in fact, when we got to the scene, there were all these different competing bills among the good guys. So Katie Porter had a bill. Pramila Jayapal had a bill. Abigail Spanberger, the new governor of Virginia, had a bill. Andy Kim, one of my favorites from New Jersey, now a senator, had a bill. Raja Krishnamurthy, running for Senate, had a bill. And it's like, okay, well, we can't ever get anything launched if they're all fighting with each other about little territorial issues. So a couple of years of work honestly went into getting consolidation around one vehicle. And it's like the gold standard. It covers including things like spouses, giant loophole. Oh, if your husband or wife or spouse can do insider trading based on your information, that's no good, right? There are fake blind trusts. It's like, oh, I don't control my assets, but I know exactly what I put into the trust. I know that nothing's been transferred out. And I'm looking at the stock prices and in committee hearings talking about that exact company or industry. So all the loopholes were taken out. And now the challenge is getting Democratic leadership on board. And I think there's an overwhelming majority of the Democratic caucus on this bill, even about 20 or so Republicans on this bill. And that's the kind of thing that could be, per Stephanie Muller's points, like a golden example of political corruption and big money corruption in our politics. It's really the merger of economic and political rigging by billionaires. If you could just have politicians get self-enriched because they have insider information, the public gets no benefit. And who has influence in that scenario? The corporate insiders, right? So that's an example of something we worked on. In the past, we started from scratch. Before Bernie ever proposed free tuition, we worked with a think tank, Heather McGee, who you might sometimes see on TV. She led a group called Demos, called Debt-Free College. And it's not free, it is debt-free. It's the principle that when you graduate from a public university, you have zero debt. And it's through a combination of levers. Increased work study, some parental contribution, increasing Pell Grants, more aid to the states so they can bring down the cost of tuition. And through a smattering of things, the net effect is you graduate with no debt. And this was only a white paper when we first got to it. We did some polling, showed it was immensely popular. Back when Chuck Schumer was not the Chuck Schumer of today and was a little bit more effective, we got him on board early, Elizabeth Warren on board early, Brian Schatz, who's from Hawaii and probably one of the next Senate Democratic leaders, maybe the top one after Schumer leaves, we'll see. Those three led the effort. And we convened a bunch of meetings and yada, yada, yada. We had over half of the Senate Democratic caucus on board within a couple months. We had over 100 House members on board within a couple months. And this was when Hillary Clinton was just getting her campaign off the ground. At first, we talked about this with her team. They were like, oh, this sounds kind of new and bold, and we've never heard about it before. And when they saw momentum building in Congress, they were like, oh, this is for real. Okay, so then she stepped out. At first, tepidly, she got rewarded. And by the end of the campaign, she was bringing it up in every debate, in her convention speech, her TV ads, one of her top pillars on her website. And to me, that was a perfect example of behind-the-scenes infrastructure working well. Partnering with other groups, they had an idea. We had the prowess to kind of pull it and get it circulated on the Hill, build a coalition, and then eventually those ideas transfer to the political space where people can campaign on them. So I'll just leave you with that. That is the importance of infrastructure and a little bit about what P Street does.
Really strategic work. I'm into it. I have to say on the stock bans, this is something that my own children, who are young adults, are always against and always harping about and are outraged that this is allowed. And just yesterday, I was on the subway and there was an ad where the wall meets the ceiling. There are these ads across the car, and it was saying, don't give these guys money. And there were a bunch of dudes with beers, Wall Street types. And then there was a small little side picture of Nancy Pelosi and some other members of Congress. And, these are the experts, actually. And there's an app where you can track their stock trading. And then, you do your own insider trading, basically, based on their stock trades. And I thought, this is fascinating. We are in New York City, and this is on the subway. I took a bad picture because I had to get closer and it was full. But it was the kind of thing where I was like, wow, this is really capturing the attention of everyday people because it's on the subway car.
Yeah. That's interesting. That's not the ideal scenario where it's like, oh, join them in insider trading. But I think it actually underscores a point you previously made about culture and how if we're doing our jobs right, there should be that kind of stuff in our TV shows, in our movies, engaging people where they are, literally in the subway in that case, right? Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. I do want to give a shout out to a group called Color of Change, which has had a really important cultural arm of their work over the years where they work with Hollywood screenwriters and stuff like that to try to get points often about systemic racism or corporate accountability written into scripts with some success. So I love your Alex P. Keaton analogy. And that would be one other way of bypassing some of the corporate money in politics and just like infusing it into multi-$100 million movies or TV shows. Seems like a good idea.
Yeah,
but that's a great example on the subway. I will look for that next time I'm in.
Yeah, look for it next time.
Yeah.
So I feel like this conversation would not be complete if I didn't also ask you about the impact of the war in Iran on elections. And it's hard to predict the future. We don't know when this war is going to be over. But really, how are you thinking about it in this moment, about how the war will affect the midterms?
I think the war will absolutely impact the midterms. And this is an issue where, at least so far, there's been almost no cleavage within the Democratic side of things. I think one ironic silver lining of Trump not even thinking about engaging the public and trying to sell them with propaganda on this war, akin to what happened before the Iraq War, is that public opinion is not turned against those who are like, what? Why are you doing this? Oh, by the way, this is illegal. And therefore, we have everyone from Elizabeth Warren to Mark Warner, who tends to be a more corporate aligned or conservative-minded senator from Virginia, coming out and saying this is an illegal war. There was no imminent threat. This is wrong. And that, to me, says that similar to the Iraq War in 2006, we could see Democrats really using this as an important issue to talk about bringing democracy back to the people. There's another element that we're starting to see in some congressional districts calling out those who have a vested interest in a quick declaration of war. One candidate in North Carolina explicitly called out the AI industry, which is running ads against her. And there's this increasing move within the Trump administration to have AI-controlled military making life or death decisions. Before Trump bombed Iran, there was a huge news cycle where he was negotiating with Anthropic very publicly, trying to get them to commit to removing guardrails to allow him to, one, surveil the American people more, and two, have AI military life or death decisions made without any human control. And they said no. And then immediately, within a few hours, he went to OpenAI, and they said, functionally, I think yes, right? Like they removed those guardrails. And Palantir is already engaged in AI, military drone type stuff and targeting. If the data is wrong, oops, sorry, wrong people died, right? If the biases or incentives written in, oops, sorry, wrong people die, school children die, nursing homes get bombed, right? And if Democrats are doing messaging effectively and remembering the skepticism towards corporate power right now, thinking beyond just the procedural issue of due process in Congress and going a little bit larger to who wins on these scenarios. Oh, your funders. Oh, the people who are paying for your East Wing ballroom. Oh, the people who are probably going to pay for your library. Oh, the people investing in your Trump coin and making you a billionaire. Oh, those people also want to go to war, right? Pennies to invest in the ballroom to get trillions of dollars back in the military-industrial complex, right? So that's how Democrats should be messaging this, not just like, oh, they should have gone to Congress first, although that's true. That's the starting point. This was an illegal war. Why was it an illegal war? There are vested interests who will profit immensely at your behalf. People will die. Americans are less secure. So I hope that we're that full-throated. And again, we will be looking for bold, economic populist, and progressive people who can carry that mantle.
Well, so every week on Future Hindsight, I ask my guest to share a civic spark, one small step we can all take to be more empowered and ignite collective change. What's a good way to turn the insights that you've just shared with us into action?
So let me start with the obvious ones, which is join the membership of groups who are doing effective work. I will say again, our website is boldprogressives.org, and Bold Progressive is our general social media name. Other great groups like Indivisible are doing great on-the-ground stuff, meeting in living rooms, planning rallies. Do what makes you feel comfortable, but do something, and collectively we can push back. I will again give a shout out to the candidates who are inspiring people. I mean, honestly, if you go on Facebook or Instagram or any social media, you'll probably see clips of Graham Plattner in Maine and Abdul El-Sayed in Michigan and lots of House candidates who are running bold campaigns. It really makes a difference to chip in $10. If 1,000 people do that, that allows them to go a little bit further, hire the next field director, hire the next staffer who can help them get their message out in communities, eventually put ads on TV or make calls to senior citizens to make sure that they're actually voting in the primary or the general. I can tell you as a person who runs a grassroots funded group, it really makes a difference. And some of the most heartwarming notes we get are from someone who says, you asked for $3. That's literally all I can afford to give, but I believe in your mission. Here's a check. And I still have some of those original notes from 2009 that we've gotten, and we get them to this day. So it really makes a difference, whether it's taking action by making phone calls, by giving money, even by joining a membership and figuring out what opportunities present themselves that you can do. Do something. If you happen to be an event director or a creative person, approach people about using your talents. Sometimes they won't quite know how to intake it, but others will gladly say yes, so go for it.
Good advice. Looking into the future, what makes you hopeful?
A number of things, but I think back to the very dark period of January, February, March in this current Trump administration and how powerless it felt when Elon Musk was taking a wrecking ball to everything and Trump looked like he might even ignore Supreme Court orders, and it just felt like there was no stopping this moving train. And realizing what happened since then, which actually directly relates to my last answer, of people stepping up, not knowing if it would work at the time, but wanting to do something. And you think about the people who showed up at Tesla dealerships and protested, and eventually their stock price went down. And eventually Elon Musk's attention had to be more on that than taking a wrecking ball to Social Security. And eventually his popularity went down so much that Trump booted him out. And if you think about the people who showed up for the No Kings rallies, not knowing if they would make any impact whatsoever, but over time chipping away such that now Trump's popularity is in the 30s. And even Republican members of Congress now on some issues have the willingness to cross him, especially in the Epstein files, but also on some war issues. And I think once we're past the primaries, even more so when people are competing in general election environments and have to appeal to a broader spectrum of the public. So it gives me hope to know that people pushing back, even not always understanding exactly how it will make a difference, collectively can save this country. And I really do believe that if we have a country in 10 years, with a constitution in 10 years, it will purely be because regular people, the type of people who are listening to this right now, made the decision not to be hopeless, but to have some hope. As James Talarico said in his acceptance speech when he won, hope is a dangerous thing for the bad guys. So let's capture that hope and change some stuff.
Yes, totally agree. Thank you very much, Adam. It was really a pleasure to have you on Future Hindsight.
Thank you so much for having me here.
Adam Green is co-founder of the Progressive Change Campaign Committee, or PCCC. Remember, civic action doesn't have to be complicated. It's about small steps that spark progress, like sharing this episode with a friend. Let's recap this week's Civic Spark and fire up our collective power. Join the groups out there that are doing great work on the ground. The PCCC, Indivisible, you name it. And in a midterm year like 2026, pay attention to races across the country and look for candidates that are doing the work that resonates with you. If you can give a few bucks, that goes a long way. And if you can't, get creative about the ways you could help. Next week on Future Hindsight, we'll be joined by Yelena Litvinov and Tatiana Margolin, co-founders of Stroika, a grassroots organizing movement that seeks to reverse the tide of rising authoritarianism by building, resourcing, and connecting resistance movements around the globe. That's next time on Future Hindsight. Now, be sure to follow us on your podcast app so you'll never miss an episode. Oh, and while you're there, please leave us a review. It really goes a long way because it helps us be discovered by other listeners. And if you're listening on your browser, you can find Future Hindsight on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or any other podcast app. We are here to build your civic action toolkit every week. So follow Future Hindsight now and we'll come right to you. And if you can't get enough Future Hindsight, consider subscribing to our YouTube channel. Head to youtube.com/Future Hindsight now. Thanks for tuning in. And until next time, see clearly, act boldly, and spark the change you want to see. This episode was produced by Zack Travis and me.
This podcast is part of the Democracy Group.